anthropomorphic cats. Patrick, coming to you. So you mentioned a sort of experiment using Copilot. I think that was with Domino's. What did you learn from that experiment about where and how deep thinking really needs to show up to maximize the sort of the quality and the efficiency of software output?
Yeah, so I mean, what I've found is that the need for deep thinking hasn't gone away. It's just relocated into a different space. And most engineers, in fact, haven't found where that space is yet. So on the deterministic application, the deep thinking is all about defining or aligning, rather, the code that's been generated with your existing estate. So that's not simple. I mean, you have to be doing all of those things that I was talking about, with the guardrails and the prompt engineering and controlling the AI slop control gate. But it's really familiar territory, you know, hitting that CI/CD pipeline, making sure the tests pass, but don't put slop or junk into production. You know, that's going to emerge as some sort of great big incident at some future point. But the really deep thinking, because it's new, is in the agentic space. And there, the challenge really is that many engineers are bringing a deterministic view into that space as a default. They're thinking about, okay, what are the important frameworks, what are the important libraries I should be using? Because most senior engineers built their credibility knowing those things, so it's natural, it's a trajectory for them. But it doesn't transfer very well, because in that space, the model is effectively the stack, and the LLM or the model is calling the shots. So what the engineers need to be focused on in terms of deep engineering thinking is things on the periphery. They need to be thinking through how am I going to engineer a context engineering window or session memory management so that the model knows exactly what my intent is. And you know, it becomes a case of really thinking through that. You know, am I going to be using in-context memory? Am I going to be using episodic retrieval? Am I going to be using RAG? Maybe a combination of those three things. Or am I going to be doing something more radical, perhaps, like fine-tuning the model, so that the model actually has in its weights the intent encoded, so that when I ask it to do something, I don't need to curate that memory context window landscape. Other things that they need to be thinking through at a deep thinking level is they need to be designing purposeful activity models into the agent. So these are called skills in the industry, and it's effectively putting the agent on a set of rails, saying, you know, do this activity first, then do this activity, then do this activity, so it doesn't go off track. That doesn't just happen. There's deep thinking involved in doing that. And then, of course, there's the tooling layer. So you've got the model context protocol, and you've also got the CLI. They need to think which one they're going to be using, but that has real economic impact on production applications, because the model control protocol, in fact, uses more tokens in production than CLI, so it's going to hit your bottom line potentially. And then finally, they need to think through the testing, right? The testing in the deterministic world is all about test-driven development, behavior-driven development, pass-fail. In the probabilistic agentic world, you still need to be doing testing, but you need to be doing different types of testing, because effectively you're dealing with a range of responses that's going to be coming back from the model. So you need to be using, or they need to be, you know, the engineers need to be deep thinking about using techniques such as a base reference of what might be in variance that absolutely can't change. When the model talks back to you, it might be your currency, it might be the country that you're operating in. And then there's also a technique called LLM as judge, which would deal with the more variable aspects that come back from that probabilistic range. And that typically scores against a scorecard, or rubric as it's called, across a couple of dimensions, just to make sure that things aren't moving radically out of that probabilistic range. Because depending on what your application is doing, particularly if it's operating in a high stakes decision environment, if it moves quite radically out of that range, that's slop, which is slop that's going to hurt you, right? So So I don't think the engineering deep thinking has gone away. It's been amplified. It's just that it's now operating in a new space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful to hear all of the sort of the practical details. I know that's something we focus on in our panels, giving the audience something useful to take away and apply in their work.